Hello and welcome to Good Words. I'm your host, Regina McMenemy, and here with me is author Evan Graham.
Hello.
And we're here today to continue our series for the Geek Embassy about how to write well. And today's topic, as we continue our character series, is stereotypes, stock, and side characters. So these are the characters that usually get less attention.
Yeah, or too much attention, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, exactly. We touched a little bit on side characters just at the very, very end of our last episode about round, dynamic, and flat and static characters, but only just sort of mentioned that this was going to be the topic that we delve into. So let's start with, what's a stereotype?
Stereotypes are, in general, just any situation where you've got like a set of traits that you associate with one specific group of people.
Right.
Like it could be a racial stereotype where everybody of this particular race acts like this, or it could be a gender stereotype where everybody of this particular gender acts like this, or it could be like all rich people are like this, or all people from this country are like this, or all people who have had this happen to them are like this. Just anything
Right.
where a set of traits are specifically identified with one particular aspect of
Right.
a person.
And often we think about those terms and we think about those traits in terms of like, you may have known one person who fit a certain characteristic, who behaved a certain way, and so you draw the conclusion that everybody in that group acts that way. Like every mad scientist wears mismatched socks.
Right.
I did actually know a mad scientist that wore mismatched socks. It was on purpose. But I didn't take it to the point where I actually believe that all mad scientists wear mismatched socks, just that was his thing. Right.
The whole all nerds wear glasses with tape on them.
Like, right. Exactly. Any of those, or wear pocket protectors. I've never owned a pocket protector.
I don't even really know what they're for. Like, what do you need to protect your pockets for? Like, I don't put stuff in the pocket. I
think pocket protectors were more important when ballpoint pens were relatively new.
Probably.
And more likely to leak.
That would make sense.
So you know, where you would put them in your pocket, you wanted something to protect your pocket because they were more likely. Now, I have had gel tip pens that have exploded on me before. So it's not that the technology is infallible, but I do think that that was part of what it was about, was when pens were a little less stable than they are now. Because pens are dangerous.
Pens, they'll get you every time.
They can be dangerous. Well, a keyboard can be dangerous too. So.
True.
All right. So stereotypes are where you, like you said, where you generally take a set of characteristics and apply it to a group, regardless of whether or not you have experience with many people in that group. Mm-hmm. What about stock characters?
Stock characters kind of derive from stereotypes, or technically more archetypes, which aren't exactly the same thing. Archetypes are a bit looser, but your stock characters are basically characters that fit this very specific role in the story. That are mostly stock characters like this are the same. You can just kind of copy and paste them into your story to fulfill any given need. Like
the same description, they have the same look, they might have the same, like if we were talking about the person who makes on the anvil who makes weapons, we're talking
the blacksmith.
About the blacksmith. So blacksmith could be a stock character because blacksmith is going to be a big burly guy who is, you know, dirty from having, you know, worked in the fires all day and has a
big scruffy guy with like big muscly arms with kind of a pot belly and this kind of apron that hangs down, and he's like always kind of sweaty and grimy. Like, we picture that in our heads.
Right.
Like
you can say the words
character.
Blacksmith and you immediately get an image of what a blacksmith is.
Yeah. Like, never mind that you can have women who are blacksmiths, or you can have people who are like more petite with their frame, or people who still maintain a cleanliness despite their profession, or any given thing like that. There's any number of ways that doesn't fit the stereotype, but we still kind of picture that stereotype when we picture that stock character.
Yeah, and that's one of it. They're powerful tools in terms of writing, where it's kind of like a shortcut. If you want to take a shortcut to create a character and not spend a lot of time on that character, that's when you insert the stock character, because you know that it's likely your reader is already going to have an idea of what that character is, what they're about, and how important they are, and what kind of person they might be. But you don't have to spend any time in or exposition creating them.
Right. And it can also be something you use as a special literary tool to tell special stories, where you intentionally defy people's expectations there, which is something I really like to do when I write, and I like to see it when other people write. And like, one person who's really good with that is Joss Whedon, because in fact the entire concept of Buffy came about from that, where he did this specifically because the stereotype, the stock character of the first girl who dies in every horror story being this ditzy kind of blonde cheerleader type who just is always the first one to go.
Right.
One of the first ones to go. He was like, I'm going to make an entire series where the main character is one of those kinds of characters, but she kicks butt and never gets screwed over like that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things that I will always love Buffy for, is knowing that he really did intentionally take that stereotype, that stock character, and turn it on its head. And I don't know how many of kind of the survival zombie or other type of board games you've played, but there's Last Night on Earth is one, and they actually have a character in it that's like the cheerleader, but she's like a sword wielding cheerleader. Nice. And I always think those are in, maybe not overtly, but are an homage to Joss Whedon's character, because it's always sort of taking that idea of, here's this little character, even if you play like Betrayal at House on the Hill, who has like one character whose like favorite thing to do is to shop, like her hobby is shopping, so, but, they all have the potential to become great characters regardless of what, that kind of stock beginning they might have.
And I think stock characters in general do definitely serve a function, and even stereotypes kind of serve a function, in the sense that it does give you kind of a framework to build off of. But it's the problem arises when you adhere to the stereotype or adhere to the stock expectations of the character and don't change anything, don't make it dynamic in any way, don't do anything original. That bothers me. And you can have some stories that are just bad, and I can't think of any off the top of my head because they're so bad you can't even necessarily remember them.
You don't remember them.
Every single character is a stock character that isn't memorable because none of them feel like anything new. They all feel like everything you've already seen before.
Right. So it's like looking at the same picture over and over again, reading the same story over and over again, because you just get that same interaction. And I don't want to constantly harp on or constantly return to Joss Whedon as the example of the person who breaks that. But there are so many great examples, which is one of the reasons why I always loved Jane as a character on Firefly, because he just was different than I expected him to be. Like you have this idea of what that heavy is going to be, and he still was kind of more emotional and sort of more sensitive than I would have normally anticipated him to be.
And I think that's something that Joss Whedon just in general really does well. Like it seems to be one of the things that he kind of bases his entire idea of filmmaking off of creating characters that you kind of expect to be a certain way, and then just completely turning your expectations on your head. Like he knows exactly what you expect is going to happen with this character, and he's not going to let that happen.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, really masterful storytelling. He's also, a masterful director. I remember he directed, back when I used to watch this god-awful show, he directed an episode of Glee back in the day. God, it was so bad. I still can't believe I spent so much time watching it. But I remember watching it and I'm like, oh my God, this actually feels like a Joss episode. And I don't even think I could pinpoint. If I watched it again, I might be able to pick it up. There was one scene where I picked up the framing of it and I'm like, oh, that's a Joss. Because there were two characters who were kissing and it was literally right at sunset. And like they came together and the sun was setting behind them. And I'm like, that's Joss. Like that is his structure. And that's part of what helps with the storytelling, at least in a visual form. Although I suppose that's launching off into a different topic.
Sure. But I think there's also reasons for some of the stereotypes that shouldn't be entirely dismissed. Like when you think of you're like going back to the blacksmith example, like there's aspects of that kind of stereotype that don't necessarily fit, like the beer gut and like the unkempt stubbly beard and stuff like that. That's not really necessarily needed for that thing. But somebody who works in a blacksmith all day long is going to be kind of a burly person. They're going to have some serious arm muscles because they spend all day hammering stuff and like hauling big chunks of metal around, and they're going to be grimy anytime they're working because they're working in this soot-filled area where there's like
the fire
coming out of the furnace, and they're getting stuff all over them. They're probably going to have like scars on their arms and hands from like constantly getting burned and cut and stuff by the stuff they work with. So, and that all by itself is going to kind of make them this probably a bit gruffer, a little bit more kind of insensitive, just because they're used to being uncomfortable and in pain sometimes. So that just kind of will contribute to that sort of concept of what it is. So that's something anytime you're creating a character you want to look at is what aspects of this stereotype are inherent to the role this person plays.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a slightly different need for that. That's part of the story and part of what we're telling with the story that we need to keep in mind. Like how does location and plot impact character as it's being created?
Yes.
And I can still hear you. I can't see you anymore. Can you talk again?
There we go.
Okay, so at least I can still, hopefully your camera will come back in a minute.
Who knows?
But I think that's the way we sort of connect all of those pieces of what makes a story together to make a character, where you can't really take the blacksmith out of the fire.
Right.
You can if he's at home after work. And,
exactly.
You're seeing him there as opposed to seeing him as he's actually developing the tools or making a sword or whatever it is he might be doing. But you can't really not have him in that place when he is like, in the middle of the action.
And there is a home too. He is going to come home after a hard day's work, and he's going to have a work face and he's going to have a home face because he's a dynamic character. Like he isn't always in his blacksmithing mode.
Right. Yeah. Like none of us are, always in whatever one mode, even if you do see someone or see someone's representation constantly in one place. That doesn't mean they don't have any other modes necessarily. So how does all this relate to side characters? So we have side characters as our third. So we can have stereotypes that work as side characters and stock characters that work as side characters, but they're really kind of their own thing as well.
Mm-hmm. Like basically, side characters are characters that they kind of flesh out the cast. They're, oh boy, I'm back. That's awesome.
There you go.
I can look at my own face. But like side characters, they exist in order to fulfill a narrative function rather than necessarily to be a part of the character, to have their own character arc. They don't exist there for their own sake. They exist there for the sake of the story.
Right.
They're there to be the blacksmith who sharpens the hero's sword, or to be the shopkeeper who sells the hero this necessary potion that he uses for his main quest, or to be the trainer who helps get the hero on his way or whatever. They're there to fulfill a role in the story, and the role they fill can be kind of stereotypical. Like the ones I just listed are things that you'll see in many fantasy type stories where you've got the hero, they go on their journey, they inevitably encounter this kind of person, this kind of person, this kind of person, and this kind of person on their way at different points. That all by itself is kind of a stereotype.
Right.
It's kind of a basically
like they get the barkeep tells them where the action is that they, or doesn't even necessarily have to tell them what their journey is going to be, but, drops whatever piece of information leads them to where they need to go next. Or
and that's kind of a stereotype all by itself. Like in any given D&D game, where do you go to find information? You go to the bar.
Right.
Ask the bartender.
Yes.
In real life, where do you go? I don't go to the bar when I want to know something. I go to Google, but if I didn't have Google, I'd probably still go to somebody else who'd have more specific information. I would just assume the bartender knows everything.
Right, exactly. It wouldn't be, or that he sees all or whatever,
Right.
has, the down low on whatever information you need. But it does, in terms of the side character role a bartender has, having the knowledge, knowing people, what people are looking for, their motivations and intentions is definitely falls to our poor barkeep.
Mm-hmm. Just once I want to see a story where somebody like goes to a bartender and like asks, have you heard anything around, like any good stories? And he's like, how should I know? Don't ask me. Like,
I just pour the
drinks. It's not my
here.
job. I just work here. Leave me alone.
You see how clean this bar is?
Yeah.
Think I can keep this bar this clean and keep tabs on everybody?
But
right.
that's a kind of a stereotypical role that these kinds of characters play in a story. Like it's actually to the point where it's rare to see those kinds of characters in any other context, which is like another thing to keep in mind. Not only do you have to think of stereotypes in terms of characters that have stereotypical traits, but also characters that fill a stereotypical role.
Exactly. And how they move the story forward.
Right. Like you'll hardly ever see a character where the bartender is the bad guy or the bartender is, I don't know, like a romantic interest or something like that. You don't tend to see that sort of thing very often.
Only
like there's
cheers.
there's no reason why those characters can't fill those roles. They just don't generally.
Yeah. We just don't like the maid or the butler as stock characters as well. Like, exactly what their purpose is and what, they're doing and what they're needed for. But, they're not generally what the story's about.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Again, like that's kind of a shorthand way of conveying information. Like when you have a fantasy story and your character walks into a bar, you kind of assume you're about to get some exposition from the bartender. Like you get that. Like it can be lazy to do it that way, but it doesn't have to be if you do it right. Like you can still make it its own
innovative
thing.
And interesting depending on how the dialogue goes and how the scene is written.
Exactly.
Yes. So there are, there are ways to make these things. And we should say that about all of these, characteristics that we're sort of looking at. There isn't really judgment. These are just the way stories are told. And like we said with Joss as an example, creating different characters that defy your expectations is also really important.
And it helps to have a mixture of the two as well.
Yes.
Like you
don't want to be testing your reader constantly, because then they just get like, I'm thinking of, it's funny because I was just talking about this with, did you watch Lost?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like that was one of my problems with Lost, was like, they were just constantly, everything was just constantly, let's throw the pieces up in the air and see where they fall.
Yeah.
And you get to a point where it's like, I can't take this anymore. I just need something to make sense.
Right. Like you were waiting for the payoff. And every single time it got mixed up even more, you were like, well, the payoff, it better be getting really good because I'm getting really confused and this is trying my patience. But whenever the payoffs came, there would always be like 10 times more new things introduced that you needed to pay off for. And like it keeps you guessing beyond your tolerance threshold.
Right, exactly. And that's what you want to make sure. That's like the fine line you want to walk as an author, is you want to make it interesting and new, but you also want to keep enough relatable material and relatable storytelling tactic to kind of keep you in. I think of reading some of William Faulkner's work in grad school. Oh God, I can't think of the one that we read. As I Lay Dying is coming to my head, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of, not gonna remember it. Have you read any Faulkner?
Not recently.
Man, I can't remember.
I'll come back to it.
Yeah, I'll come back to it. But the basic of the story is that like it's told, the whole novel is 4 chapters. And each chapter, they're long chapters. Each chapter is told from the point of view of a different character. And the first chapter is told by the intellectually challenged youngest son of the family.
Mm.
And you don't know as a reader, as you're reading it, that the family's house, which was like one of those like southern mansions, they sell off the land around it to a golf course eventually. So there's a character named Caddy. The sister's name is Caddy, but you're also hearing reference to the caddy on the golf course. So you have like the same name being used in two different, constantly told from a point of view of a character Benji is his name, who doesn't understand the world really. So you're told from his first person point of view. Does it sound horrible?
No, it sounds interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, there's a lot to say, and it's a very interesting experience, kind of in that modernist aesthetic where they kind of just dove into stream of consciousness and trying to be in the head of a character, because, not thinking that characters who are telling from a first person point of view are going to be as rational and together as we had seen them up until that point. It completely throws all that out of the window. And it's fun and exciting, but man, it is like the most exhausting chapter of reading I think I've done in my entire life. And I love Faulkner, and I love, I wrote my master's thesis about him. I just absolutely adored him. But man, it was hard work to have so much of what you understand of storytelling be thrown out the window.
And that's a thing too. If you're like, it's great to subvert people's expectations, but if you do it constantly, it won't work anymore, because you won't be subverting their expectations because they'll be expecting you to.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Every once in a while you have to throw them a bone and give them exactly what they would have expected.
It's like the boy who called wolf, right? It's like the boy who called wolf. It's the same idea, where if you keep doing it, then you're going to be like, oh, well, it's so-and-so, so they're going to do that. But how come that hasn't happened with Joss Whedon then?
I'm sure, well, he does occasionally throw in characters that do sort of meet your expectations here and there. Like I'm thinking, like Cabin in the Woods is one of his examples where most of his characters are very intentionally, specifically made to be these stereotypes that we have in that kind of Cabin in the Woods horror genre, where you've got kind of like, and it's even story driven why these characters fit these stereotypes. They're specifically addressing the fact that they do fit these stereotypes, and that's what they're there for. But you also, in the same story, have characters who subvert those stereotypes. Like you've got the stoner guy ends up becoming one of the heroes of the story, where in most of the time with your horror story, he's one of the first people to die, and he's gone for the rest of the movie, and just it falls apart. So like that's, I think, something that Joss Whedon does get. He makes sure to occasionally throw in a character that does fit exactly the stereotype you expect, in order to kind of keep you guessing.
Yeah, because there has to be some sort of balance in it. They can't just all be one not doing what they're supposed to do.
And it can't be, you still can't even have it be either or. Like you can't have every single character be either a stereotype or a complete subversion of the stereotype. You also have to have your round characters who aren't stereotypes in any direction, who are just real people basically in the story. Like that still should be kind of the main pull of your story, is having these kinds of characters who act like real people in those situations.
Yep. Good. All right. Well, I think that pretty much sums us up for stereotype, stock, and side characters. I think that's a good discussion and a good means of how to relate them to some of the other characters that we've talked to. I just said tutu. Tutu. So you can kind of see how they would fit with antagonists, protagonists, heroes, and villains as well, because you have to have all of those playing together to make an effective story. So let us know in the comments, what do you think? When do you see stereotypes or stock characters used well? When have you seen them not used well? When have they been maybe abused or not managed particularly effectively? So let us know, and make sure to tune in next time for more good words.